welcome to a little JS office hour with Viking Code School. My name is Chris and I am an instructor and developer with Viking Code School. And today what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be answering a question asked by Ari Pata on Reddit. His basic question is the concept of objects is very abstract to him, and it's keeping him stuck in his JS learning. And he goes on to say basically that he would like to know how to use objects in web pages, and also that when asking questions about object-oriented programming, it's very common to get bombarded with answers about very specific things and detailed information about object-oriented programming because it's such a wide umbrella with so much information available about it. And so much very advanced information that people have a tendency to get started in the middle of the conversation instead of starting at the beginning. And it can make it very difficult to find that place where you should really start learning about object-oriented programming and how to use it with JavaScript in your web pages. So my advice to you, Harry Potter, is divide and conquer. Split up what you need to learn into accessible pieces of knowledge. That way, you can study them in a clear order. And to make a point there, that's exactly what some of our prep work does. Just to give an example, JavaScript objects. We have a lesson on this. I'm not going to go through the lesson right now, but I will give an example. And I'll continue to give examples for each one of these. So for example, there's JavaScript objects, classes, constructors, events and DOM manipulation, templates, and AJAX requests, all of which are things that objects can be used in JavaScript to interact with in your web page in various different ways. So right off the bat, yeah, you can see that there's a lot of options here. So let's get started. So the most common way that you're going to create objects in JavaScript is through object literal syntax. And that is what we have right here. Also explained in our prep work, basic syntax with objects. So we have a person object, and inside these curly braces, we have a series of key value pairs, where on the left we have the name of the property and then its value on the right. So we have a name of George, age 20, and then we have a function that we created in this object called greet that returns a greeting with this object's name plugged into the string. And just a note, whether you are or aren't familiar with this syntax with the backticks, it allows for string interpolation. If you were doing this in an environment that did not support this new feature, you could use concatenation with this syntax up here. But we're favoring more modern browsers and environments at this point. We'll use the newer syntax. So I can run this with Node. We'll get some output here, the full object, and then its few properties, and then I'm outputting the result of calling greet, and we can see that we get hello world, my name is George. So this is just an example of the basic syntax, the most basic syntax you can use to create an object. You're most likely already familiar with this. This is not necessarily using an object yet in an actual web page, but this is what we're working with here. The most basic way that you can create an object. Another way that you can create objects with JavaScript, and is more classically object-oriented, is classes. So classes are fairly new to JavaScript. They're new in ES6, but at this point, you can take advantage of them in most modern browsers. This is the syntax for creating a class. So we have a class of person here. It has a constructor function in which we're assigning some properties, name and age, much like you saw before with our object literal syntax. And we have a function, greet, that outputs the same kind of message that we saw before. And before I get into these other classes down here, we'll just run this and we'll take a look at the first example here. So we're just outputting the person object itself. You can see that it has a type of person, and we're outputting its various properties and the result of the greet function. So now I can uncomment these, and we'll take a look at inheritance. So when we see class male extends person and female extends person, what this is inheritance. And classes and inheritance are explained in our prep work on EX6 classes. So what is inheritance? It just basically means that this class inherits its functionality from person. So we can see here when we're calling super and we're passing in name and age, we are calling the constructor of the superclass and basically saying that, okay, now we have all of this functionality and these properties in our instance of the male class, and we're going to add the property that this instance's gender is male, and likewise for the female, its gender is female. And we're going to output this. You can see that we have an instance of male, an instance of female with hello world, my name is George, and my name is Georgia. So this is a slightly more complex but classic way of using objects and object-oriented programming with a parent class or superclass and child classes or subclasses. Continuing to split up the various different pieces of knowledge that you can focus on with learning about object-oriented programming and how to use it in your web pages with JavaScript, we can take a closer look at constructors and constructor functions. So when we were looking at the classes, we saw that constructor function right here. Well, it wasn't that long ago that we didn't have this class functionality in JavaScript. Remember, I said that this is new in ES6. So what are constructors doing? This is actually fairly useful knowledge to know as a JavaScript developer. This example will attempt to break it down into its most simple parts. So we have a function called person. And like I said, not too long ago, this is how you would create a class in JavaScript, because we didn't have that class keyword or syntax in JavaScript. So we call new person just like we did before with the class, and we output its properties and the greet function. So you see that we have a person here named George, age 20. We're outputting the same information here. So what does a constructor do? It creates a new blank object. It immediately runs the constructor function on that object with that object set to this. So imagine that behind the scenes an object is created, something like this is equal to that, an empty object. I mean, don't try this because this will throw an error. You can't actually set a value this way to this, but that's what's going on behind the scenes. So we're assigning A to this.A, B to this.B, and then we're returning this. So why do this? Because this is what's going on under the hood when we do this. We get an object created, and to emulate this, we're using underthehood.call, and we're passing in the object that we want to be used as this. And if this is going over your head a little bit, that's okay. This is just a way to show what's going on behind the scenes with a constructor function. So we're passing in an empty object as this, and we're passing in the parameters to the function as subsequent arguments. And then we return this to emulate what happens when we call new. So you can see that we're actually getting an object back with A equal to 1 and B equal to 2. Now the difference here when we call new is that we don't need to specify a value for this because, remember, that's going on behind the scenes. And also, you can see that it's actually assigned a type of under the hood. So when it's console logged, it's saying this object has a type, is an instance of under the hood. So this is a little look behind the scenes at what constructor functions are doing. Yet another way that objects are used in web pages is through JavaScript events and DOM manipulation. So if you're not familiar with what DOM means, it's Document Object Model, and it just refers to the HTML page. So here we have some HTML. In this HTML, we're requiring jQuery and Bootstrap just for prettiness. Don't worry too much about that. We have more importantly this markup here with this list element of people, and we have our own script here, script.js, and this is what's in script.js. So this should look familiar. We have our constructor function. I'm using the function syntax here, and we are creating some new people and putting them in an array of people so we can iterate over them. And then this is our behavior. So when the document is ready, that's what this function is doing here. When we pass it to jQuery like this, when the document is ready, we're going to go get that element here with an ID of people, and then we're going to iterate over our array. And for each person in this array, we're going to get that person. We're going to create a link and pass that person's name as text to that link, so we can see that happening right here. And then we're going to assign an event listener. So if you've never heard an event listeners, specifically, it's not only a feature of jQuery, it's actually a feature of JavaScript. And it's fairly nice and pleasant to use. It's a very common library to use for interacting with events in JavaScript. Also covered in our prep work under events, attaching listeners, and plenty more information about how to work with events. So what else is going on here? We have this prevent default. This is something both lines 25 and 28 that you're going to want to do when you override the click event of an anchor tag, because what we want is when we click this, you can see here that it displays hello world, my name is George and I'm 20 years old. But we don't want the default functionality of clicking the link and bringing us to another page or reloading the page. So that is what this prevent default and return false is doing. The meat of the click function is right here, where we get the greeting and we alert the greeting. And then later on, we take those elements that we created up here and we take our person and we put it in this list element that we created here, and then we append that to people, our top level unordered list. So this is a way that objects are used in front-end development that you can use on your web pages. So this is one of the ways that that's accomplished. Another common way that objects are used in web development is in templates. So here I have an Express application, a very small Express application. You don't necessarily need to be familiar with Express. Here it is, just a minimal web framework. And basically what we have is the same objects that we saw before. We have our person class. We have an array of people. And if you take anything away from this code down here, it should just be this line here that says we're rendering a view and passing people to that view. And the view just happens to be here. So as a front-end developer, you might be required to work with templates. This is a template. So we have our layout, which we're rendering a body. And in the body, we're rendering this markup, this HTML right here. We have our people. And each person is an object with the property name and age. And templates are a fairly common thing that you'll find in JavaScript, or just basically in web development in general, because chances are that you might have some kind of object or resource, in this case people, that you want to display information about. And templates like this make it very simple to pass that object to a template engine. In this case, we're using handlebars, and render a view like this, where we have a list of people. And this is covered in our lesson, in our prep work on templates. There's a few lessons that you might want to read up on before that. This is a little bit more advanced, namely about Express and how that's used. But once again, something that we cover. And this is just another example of how objects are used in web development. Another way that objects are used in web pages with JavaScript is through AJAX. Basically, what we have with AJAX, which stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML, is we have some JavaScript that makes a request to a server, gets some information back, and then you can do something with that information. So in this case, we have JSON. JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. And that's exactly what we have here. We have a collection of objects. And this should look familiar from the other examples that you saw. We have a file called people with our collection of people objects. And then we have the script, which you're requiring here. And this should also look familiar. The only difference is we have this object that we're creating here with this function, all, which uses the fetch API to make a request to that URL, people, JSON, which is going to go here, and then returns that JSON. So we call people all when the document's ready, and then we get the people from the response. And then once again, we're going to reach out to that unordered list, and we're going to populate it. So for each person, we're going to create that link with the person's name, assign a click listener, and construct our greeting. And when we click, we're going to alert that greeting. And we're continuing on like we did before, appending the elements to the various parents. So here in our page, I'm clicking on George, and we can see we have that message. And if you want to learn more about this, we have a lesson on the Fetch API. It's in our core curriculum though, as this is basically a much more advanced topic. So if you did want a little bit more information on this, you could always check out the MDM docs or jQuery. It's commonly used for AJAX. But once again, this is just another example of how objects are used in web development. I just want to wrap up by saying that we've covered a whole bunch of different ways that objects can be used in web development and your web pages. The main point and key takeaway here is to divide and conquer. To split up what you want to learn into accessible pieces of knowledge. Object basics, classes, object-oriented programming. It's very separate from actually putting it to use in your web pages. And try not to overwhelm yourself. By all means, take advantage of our prep work. You just want to sign up for an account, and then you'll have access to our free prep work, where there's plenty explained about how to use objects in various points in the life cycle of web development. Not to mention apply for our immersive program, in which we teach full stack web development, including Express all the way to React. And just to briefly touch on React, React is the epitome of using object-oriented programming in your web development. So basically, we have objects in JavaScript, and now these classes that we've been looking at, they represent components. So In this way, there is absolutely nothing different from making a class to creating HTML on the page, and that is the gap that React bridges between JavaScript and the DOM. So quite advanced here. Don't necessarily want to get too deep into it, but just know that object-oriented programming in a framework like React is the basis for the entirety of the framework. Its very foundation is in object-oriented programming. So yeah, just to wrap up, object-oriented programming in web development is all over the place, and it's a very broad umbrella. You can get started with it with the simple examples that I provided you with, and by all means, like I said, go through our free prep work, take advantage of that. But I'd like to just thank you, Ari Pata, for asking your question and providing fuel for the fire for us at Viking Code School to reach out to folks like you and spread knowledge. So thanks for watching, and talk to you soon.